A billionaire CEO walks through Central Park on a freezing morning, focused, untouchable, alone. But when two starving twins offer to sell him a battered toy car to save their dying mom, everything in his world shatters. What he does next doesn't just save a life, it rewrites four of them. Stay with us. This story will break your heart and put it back together. Dear friend, what you're about to experience is not just a story, it's a deeply human journey about lost resilience and the quiet, unexpected ways love finds us when we need it most. If this is your first time here, I invite you to drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing your voice. And if you're someone who believes in second chances and the hidden strength of ordinary people, and in stories that stay with you long after they end, consider subscribing and tapping the bell icon. We share moments that matter. Thank you for being part of this one. Now let's begin. Day. The wind knifed through Central Park, like it held a grudge, tearing through scarves and turning breath into clouds. It was the kind of morning most people hurried through, eyes down, shoulders hunched, coffee clutched like a lifeline. But on a weather-worn bench just past the Bethesda fountain, two boys sat perfectly still. They were 10 maybe. Identical right down to the freckles, though one had a scrape on his cheek that looked recent. Their jackets were too thin, their shoes worn through at the toes. Between them, resting carefully on a faded cloth, was a gleaming red toy car. Its paint had dulled with time edges chipped, but it had clearly been loved. The kind of toy that had a name, a backstory, a place of honor on a bedroom shelf. Eli Green's fingers tightened around it as a gust of wind rattled the leaves. "We have to sell it," he whispered, not for the first time. His brother Noah nodded, his jaw clenched. "I know," but neither moved. Not yet. Not until the next burst of courage pushed them forward. Most people passed them without a glance. Some slowed for a second, brows furrowed with sympathy or suspicion before quickening their steps. New Yorkers were used to scenes that asked too much of them emotionally. But if anyone had paused, really looked, they might have seen the desperation etched in those small shoulders. The hunger behind the bright blue eyes. The kind of sorrow that doesn't belong on a child's face. They hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. A granola bar split in half. But that wasn't what drove them here. Their mother, Anna Green, was dying. It had started as exhaustion, then fevers, then something worse. The hospital had said words like renal failure and dehydration and emergency care. But they hadn't said the one word that mattered most, affordable. There was no one else. Their father had died 3 years ago in a construction accident. No siblings, no extended family, just Anna and the boys holding each other together with string and hope. And now that string was fraying. Eli stared down at the car, the last thing their dad had given them. A birthday gift. A memory sealed in metal and paint. It felt like betrayal to let it go. But watching their mother pale and unconscious in their tiny Bronx apartment felt worse. "We'll try near the walkway," Noah said, voice hoarse. More people there. They stood, straightened their backs, and walked toward the crowd. It was a ridiculous plan, and they knew it. Who would pay for an old toy in the middle of Central Park? But kids believe in impossible things, and these boys had run out of possible ones. "Excuse me," Eli said to a woman in a crisp blazer. She didn't hear or pretended not to. A jogger veered around them. A man on his phone waved them away like a nuisance. Noah's voice cracked as he tried again. "It's a really good car. The door's open." They tried for almost an hour. Rejections stacked like invisible bricks on their backs. But they didn't cry, they didn't sit down. They kept holding out that little car like it was their last thread of hope, because it was. And then he appeared, tall, immaculate, moving like the cold didn't touch him. His coat was cashmere, his shoes cost more than their rent, and his eyes were fixed on something internal. Calculations, deadlines, projections. He wasn't strolling through the park. He was striding through it on his way to a future other people dreamed about. Julian Carter didn't believe in fate. He believed in quarterly reports and capital returns and minimizing risk. He built Carter Dynamics from nothing into a tech empire. People called him a genius, a titan, a machine. And then he heard the voice. "Sir, would you like to buy our car? It shouldn't have registered." But it did. Julian slowed, turned. Two boys, identical, thin as shadows, one holding out a red toy car with both hands like it was made of glass. "We're selling it," the boy continued. "It's really fast. It still works." Julian didn't know why he didn't walk away. He didn't have time for this, he didn't have room for this, but he crouched. How much, he asked. The twins looked at each other. "Whatever you can pay," the other boy said softly. We need to help our mom." Something unfamiliar twisted in Julian's chest. He looked at the car. It was battered, yes, but wiped clean with care. The wheels turned smoothly. The paint, though chipped, still shone when the sun hit it just right. This wasn't a sale. This was a sacrifice. Julian reached for his wallet, pulled out bills without counting, handed them over. The boys gasped. The amount was obscene for a toy, but they didn't argue. "Thank you," one of them whispered. His fingers lingered on the car for a moment longer, then let go. They turned and ran. Julian stood there, the car in his hand, the cold forgotten. The twins were already a blur slipping into the park's maze of paths. He should have walked away. Instead, he turned to his driver and said 3 words he hadn't said in a long time. "Follow those kids." Julian Carter sat back in the leather seat of his Blacktown car, the small red toy car still cradled in his palm. It felt strange in his hands, light plastic, insignificant. And yet, it felt heavier than anything he'd held in years. He stared at the worn edges, the chipped paint, the way the wheels still turned smoothly with a soft flick. It should have meant nothing to him. A child's toy, but it did. The boys had disappeared down the winding paths of Central Park, vanishing into the early morning foot traffic like ghosts. They had no idea that their world was about to change. Neither did he. "Keep an eye on them," he said quietly to his driver Marcus, who raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. Marcus had worked for Julian long enough to recognize when to stay silent. They trailed the boys from a distance, taking sharp turns through the park's side exits and into the jagged heart of the Bronx. It wasn't a neighborhood Julian ever thought he'd set foot in. Crumbling brick facades, peeling paint, metal bars on every window. The twins moved quickly, their heads down their shoulders, tense, glancing over their shoulders as if the city might notice they didn't belong even here. Julian watched them slip through the rusted door of a tenement building with a broken buzzer and graffiti on the walls. He hesitated only for a moment. Then he stepped out of the car. The building smelled of mildew and something older hopelessness. He climbed the stairs, each step creaking under his polished shoes. The sounds of life echoed from behind closed doors, TVs playing too loudly, babies crying, someone arguing in Spanish. On the 4th floor, he stopped at the door he'd seen the boys disappear into. It was painted a dull blue, the paint chipping around the edges. He knocked. At first, there was no answer. Then slowly the door cracked open. A wary eye peeked through the gap. Eli. The moment he recognized Julian, his expression shifted from suspicion to confusion. "It's the man from the park," Eli called out over his shoulder. Noah appeared behind him. They looked scared. Of what Julian wasn't sure, strangers maybe. Adults, men in suits, life in general. "Can I come in?" Julian asked, surprising even himself with the gentleness in his voice. The boys didn't answer right away. Then wordlessly, Eli stepped aside. The apartment was small and dim. One room doubled as a kitchen and living space, a mattress on the floor serving as both bed and sick room. Anna Green lay there unconscious, a damp cloth on her forehead. Her skin was gray, her lips cracked. She looked young, too young to be the mother of 10-year-olds, but the illness had aged her. Julian had seen spreadsheets on poverty statistics reports on urban medical deserts, but he had never seen it like this, not in such raw, aching proximity. "How long has she been like this?" he asked. 3 weeks, Noah said. "She keeps getting worse." Julian knelt beside her and touched her wrist. Her skin burned with fever and her pulse was thin. She needed care, real care, not hope, not granola bars, not hand-me-downs from another charity drive. Actual medicine, equipment, doctors. "She needs to be in a hospital," he said firmly. "We can't pay," Eli whispered. "We tried. That's why we were selling the car." Julian stood up. He didn't deliberate. He didn't weigh options. He pulled out his phone. "Marcus, bring the car around. We're taking someone to the hospital." The boys stood frozen. "But what about the rules? What if they don't take her?" Noah asked. "They'll take her," Julian said. "I'll make sure they do." He lifted Anna as gently as he could, surprised by how little she weighed. She stirred faintly but didn't wake. The boys followed, running to keep pace as he descended the stairs. In the car, they crowded close to their mother, whispering reassurances she couldn't hear. Julian didn't speak. He didn't explain himself. What was there to say? He watched them in the rearview mirror, the two small boys gripping their mother's limp hand, their faces tight with fear and hope. It was a tableau that didn't belong in his world of earnings calls and global summits. But here it was, pressing itself into his orderly, impenetrable life like a force of nature. At the hospital, things moved quickly. Julian's name still carried weight, and when he announced himself as Anna's emergency contact, no one questioned it. She was admitted within minutes. Doctors examined her, nurses attached IVs. The boys huddled in chairs outside the ER, their legs swinging above the floor. One of the doctors pulled Julian aside. "Severe dehydration, kidney complications, probably from untreated infection. She's very lucky you brought her in when you did. Any later..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. "Will she recover?" Julian asked. "With treatment, yes, but she'll need care, monitoring, possibly dialysis. It'll be a long road." Julian nodded, already calculating logistics in his head. Then he looked through the glass at the boys, Noah holding Eli's hand, both of them visibly trembling. He couldn't just leave them here. That night, after the boys had been allowed to visit their mother after doctors promised she was stable but needed rest, Julian drove them back to his townhouse in Manhattan. It wasn't a decision made with any thought. It just felt necessary. They sat in stunned silence as the gates opened to reveal a limestone mansion glowing under soft lights. The driver parked, and Julian opened the door. "You'll stay here," he said simply, "just until your mom gets better." The boys looked up at the house, eyes wide, unsure whether to feel awe or fear. "It's huge," Noah whispered. "Like a museum." Julian didn't reply. He was already walking toward the door. Inside, the warmth of the house was a shock after the cold of their apartment. Mrs. Kingsley, his longtime housekeeper, appeared with a questioning look. "Guests," Julian said before she could speak. "Set up the east wing." She nodded and disappeared. The boys were still frozen in the entry hall, staring up at the grand staircase. "Where should we sleep?" Eli asked quietly. Julian turned. "Anywhere you want." And with that, the door to his meticulously walled-off world began to open just a crack, but enough for the light to start seeping in. The first few days in Julian Carter's penthouse passed in a quiet, uncertain rhythm. Eli and Noah Green moved through the space like guests in a museum, too careful, too quiet, never taking their jackets off unless asked and always waiting for permission. They sat side by side at the edge of their new beds each night as if unsure whether they were allowed to sleep deeply in something so soft. The East Wing, once a cold, unused expanse, was now echoing with hushed voices and creaking floorboards as the twins tiptoed through their cautious adjustment. Julian, for his part, felt disoriented. He had built a life on solitude and structure. His world functioned like a well-oiled machine, each moment accounted for every interaction transactional. But now his mornings began with soft footsteps down the hall. Voices debating whether pancakes or cereal was the superior breakfast, and the occasional thud of a dropped book or a sprinting child colliding with a hallway vase. His house, once pristine and silent, now pulsed with life. At first, he kept his distance, unsure of how to navigate the sudden presence of two children who weren't his. He wasn't their father or guardian or even a family friend. He was the stranger who bought their toy car and brought them home. But something in the way the boys looked at him, equal parts suspicion and hope, kept pulling him back into their orbit. It was Noah who first began to soften toward him. One evening after dinner, Julian found him sitting on the floor of the library, staring at a chessboard that had been collecting dust for years. Without a word, Julian sat down across from him and moved a pawn. Noah hesitated, then mirrored the move. They played in silence, the pieces clicking softly against the board. Julian didn't let him win, but he also didn't overpower him. And when Noah finally captured his queen, a crooked grin lit up the boy's face for the first time since arriving. The next night, Eli joined in. They played until Mrs. Kingsley gently reminded them that children needed sleep more than checkmates. Day by day, the boundaries between them faded. Julian began working from home more often, answering calls from his office but never missing lunch with the boys. He watched them explore the garden out back, helped them build a makeshift kite from newspapers and twine, and even taught them how to polish their shoes, not out of necessity, but because they had asked, fascinated by his gleaming Italian leather boots. Then came the call from the hospital. Anna Green was awake. The boys nearly knocked over the breakfast table in their rush to grab their coats. Julian drove them himself, foregoing the driver, not trusting anyone else to get them there quickly enough. At the hospital, when they rushed into their mother's room, Julian hesitated by the door. He wasn't sure if he belonged in that moment. Anna turned her head, her eyes bleary but wide with recognition. "My boys," she whispered. She tried to sit up, wincing, and Julian stepped forward instinctively, ready to help. Their eyes met for the first time. She looked at him with confusion first, then understanding, then gratitude so raw it made him look away. "Mr. Carter, I don't know what to say," she murmured. "You don't have to say anything," Julian replied. "Just get better." Over the next week, Julian visited her daily, bringing updates from the boys' Eli's near miss with a tree while riding a scooter. Noah's obsession with the telescope Julian had dusted off from the attic. Anna listened with a smile, color slowly returning to her cheeks, her voice growing stronger. When she was finally discharged for outpatient care, Julian offered to bring her home, not to her old apartment, but to his penthouse at least temporarily. She hesitated, pride flickering across her face. "I can't stay in your house. We've already taken too much." "It's not a transaction," he said gently. "It's a home, and right now you and your boys are part of it." Back at the penthouse, Anna's presence grounded everything. The twins relaxed visibly with her nearby. Julian watched as she folded laundry beside Mrs. Kingsley, insisting on contributing. He listened to her laugh as the boys staged a mock talent show in the living room, complete with sock puppets and off-key singing. But what struck him most was how naturally she inhabited his world. She wasn't intimidated by the wealth, didn't fawn over the luxuries. She treated his home like what it had never truly been, a place to live, not just reside. One evening, as the sun set behind the city skyline, Julian found her in the kitchen, stirring a pot of stew. She turned surprised to see him watching. "Is this okay?" she asked. "I know you probably have chefs who—" "It's more than okay," he interrupted. "It smells like something I forgot I missed." She smiled then. A soft, knowing smile. "You don't talk much about your past." He didn't respond immediately. He looked out the window at the distant lights of the city. "I had a son," he said quietly. "His name was Thomas. He would have been about the boy's age now." Anna said nothing, just set down the spoon and gave him space. "After the accident," he continued, "I locked his room. Haven't opened it since. Until 2 days ago. She didn't ask what he saw in there. She didn't press. She just nodded. Sometimes healing starts with a small crack," she said, "a little light getting in." He looked at her, then really looked, and saw not just a mother or a guest, or someone he'd helped. He saw a woman who had fought to survive for her children, who had accepted help without letting it erase her dignity, who now stood in his kitchen like she belonged. Strangers. Once. But something was changing. Julian didn't know what it meant yet, or what came next. But he knew this: the boys weren't just staying temporarily. And neither, perhaps, was she. For the first time in years, Julian Carter felt the stirrings of something he had long buried: connection. Not fleeting or transactional, but real, tangled, alive. And he didn't want to walk away. Spring rolled in quietly, bringing with it a kind of transformation Julian Carter hadn't expected. It began with small things: a pair of rain boots by the door, mismatched socks in the laundry, scribbled drawings of rocket ships taped to the refrigerator. Then came the laughter, the constant undercurrent of energy, the rhythm of life. Somewhere along the line, the penthouse ceased to be a monument to absence and became a home. Anna Green, still regaining her strength, had settled into a quiet confidence that made her presence feel natural. She moved through the space like someone reclaiming life, folding towels, preparing simple meals, laughing at the boys' antics. Julian watched her with a kind of reverence, never quite sure how this once struggling woman had so seamlessly woven herself into the fabric of his once empty world. The twins had blossomed. Eli, once wary and guarded, became a confident question-asker, insatiably curious about how things worked, from elevators to airplanes to stock markets. Noah, always the gentler twin, had taken to helping Mrs. Kingsley water the rooftop garden, learning the names of flowers and herbs with wide-eyed wonder. They had learned to trust the space, to belong in it, to leave toys on the floor without fearing they'd be scolded. Julian began to change too, though he noticed it only in reflection. He caught himself humming in the mornings. He found excuses to finish work early. He even showed up to the boys' first baseball practice in the park, a coffee in one hand and a folding chair in the other, unsure of how he looked, but knowing he didn't want to miss it. He cheered loudly when Eli hit a ball farther than anyone expected, and stayed long after practice ended to play catch with Noah under the fading sun. There was one evening, just a regular Thursday, when the four of them had dinner on the rooftop terrace. The lights of the city glittered below. The air was soft and warm, and Julian had grilled chicken on a charcoal grill he hadn't touched in years. The boys were talking over each other, interrupting with excitement about school projects and upcoming field trips, and Anna laughed as she tried to keep up. Julian looked around the table and felt something shift inside his chest, an ache that wasn't pain, but something deeper. Longing, maybe, or love. Later that night, after the twins had fallen asleep, Julian and Anna sat in the quiet kitchen. He handed her a glass of wine and leaned against the counter. You've rebuilt your strength faster than I imagined, he said. I had good reasons to get better, she replied. 2 loud, chaotic, amazing reasons. And what about you? He asked. What do you want now? Anna, she didn't answer right away. She stared at her glass, then out the window at the city she used to feel so far removed from. I used to think survival was enough, she said slowly. But lately I've been wondering what living might look like. Julian nodded, understanding more than he wanted to admit. They sat in silence for a while, and then he said, "Would you ever consider staying?" She turned to him surprised. "I mean, permanently." The words hung between them, not casual, not impulsive. "You've done so much already, Julian," she said softly. "I don't want to take advantage. It's not about owing," he replied. "It's about choice. I'm choosing you. All of you." Tears sprang to her eyes, though she blinked them away. "The boys, they love you, you know. I love them too," he said, his voice thick with emotion he barely recognized. "And you." Anna set her glass down, stepped closer and looked up at him. "If I say yes," she whispered, "I'm not just accepting your generosity. I'm building something with you. This isn't rescue anymore. It's partnership." "That's exactly what I want," he said. A week later, Julian brought the boys to the Hudson River Park for a picnic. It was late afternoon, the sky streaked with gold and lavender. After sandwiches and soccer, he gathered them near the rocks overlooking the water. "I have something to ask your mom," he said, heart pounding. He pulled out a small velvet box. Anna gasped as he knelt. Not formally, not extravagantly, just earnestly. "I never expected a toy car to change my life," he said. "But it did. You did. Will you marry me?" She nodded, through tears, the boys whooping with joy behind her. Back at the penthouse that night, Noah crawled into Julian's lap as they watched a movie. "Does this mean we get to stay forever?" he asked. Julian looked down, heart full. "If that's what you want." Eli appeared beside them, his voice steady. "Can we call you Dad?" The question unraveled whatever threads Julian had been clinging to. "You can," he said, "when you're ready." They didn't wait. They leaned into him, small arms around his sides, calling him Dad, as if the word had always belonged to him. And in that moment, Julian Carter, a man who had spent so long believing his life had ended with loss, realized he'd found a new one. Not in boardrooms or IPOs, but in the sound of a child's voice calling him home. The wedding was small, understated, and impossibly beautiful. Set in the rooftop garden of Julian Carter's penthouse, the ceremony took place beneath a trellis of climbing roses that Anna had carefully tended alongside Mrs. Kingsley and the boys. The city skyline rose behind them like a quiet witness to a story it never expected to be part of. The guest list included only the closest few, Julian's longtime assistant, Anna's neighbor from the Bronx, who used to watch the boys when she worked night shifts, and a pediatric nurse who had become like family during Anna's recovery. But more than anyone, it was the presence of Eli and Noah that mattered most. They stood proudly in small navy suits, each holding a ring pillow with solemnity, and barely contained excitement as their mother and Julian exchanged vows. Julian had always believed in control, in predictability, in measured steps. But the words he spoke to Anna that morning were anything but rehearsed. "I thought I had already lived the best parts of my life," he said, voice breaking. "But I hadn't. You, Eli, and Noah, you've taught me how to begin again." Anna reached for his hands, eyes bright with emotion. "You saved our lives, Julian. But more than that, you gave us a future. And in return, I want to give you something you thought you'd lost: family laughter. Love all of it." When the ceremony ended, the boys didn't wait for permission. They threw their arms around both adults, shouting, "We're really a family now." And just like that, something old and broken within Julian mended in a way he never thought possible. The months that followed brought a new rhythm, a beautiful chaos. Mornings filled with the sounds of running feet and clinking cereal bowls. Evenings spent reading aloud or watching the boys build complicated Lego worlds that took over the coffee table. Julian still ran Carter Dynamics, but he was no longer first to arrive or last to leave. He worked from home more often, took school drop-offs seriously, and prioritized parent-teacher conferences as if they were board meetings. No one at the company questioned him. His performance hadn't declined, it had deepened. Focused. If anything, the man who once obsessed over profit margins now seemed anchored by something more powerful than quarterly reports, purpose. Anna, fully recovered and thriving, took a job as Director of Community Engagement at a nonprofit that provided healthcare access to single mothers. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered to her. Julian supported her without reservation, showing up to her fundraisers, encouraging her initiatives, and handling dinner when she worked late. They were a team, fluid, respectful, resilient. The boys adjusted to private school faster than anyone anticipated. Not because of the academics, but because for the first time they felt safe. Stable. Seen. They joined the science club, the soccer team, and even convinced Julian to coach the robotics squad after they discovered his hidden engineering skills. One night, after placing second in a statewide competition, Eli curled up next to Julian on the couch and whispered, "Dad, I wish Thomas could have been here." Julian froze. No one had spoken his son's name aloud in years. "I think he'd have liked building robots," Eli added softly. Julian wrapped an arm around the boy heart, pounding. "I think he would have loved you both very much." The subject of Thomas was no longer avoided. Instead, his memory became part of their story, woven gently into family dinners, bedtime conversations, and even a corner of the rooftop garden where a small plaque now read, "For Thomas, who taught us how to love again." One crisp October afternoon, Anna found Julian standing by the window, watching the boys race across the lawn with a kite. The skyline shimmered in the distance, but Julian's eyes were focused on the chaos below. "You okay?" she asked, wrapping her arms around his waist. He nodded. "More than okay. I never thought this would be our life," she said, her voice soft. "Neither did I, but I wouldn't change a single moment." They stood like that for a long time, just watching, listening, breathing in the peace that had taken so long to earn. Later that evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Noah pulled out a crumpled essay from his backpack. "It was for English class," he explained. "We had to write about something that changed our life." Julian took the paper, unfolded it, and began to read aloud. "The day I sold my favorite toy car, I didn't know it would lead me to a new home, a new dad and a family. I thought I was losing something important. But sometimes letting go is how we make room for something better. My family isn't perfect, but it's everything. And I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world." No one spoke for a while after he finished reading. Anna wiped a tear from her cheek. Julian looked down at the red toy car still resting on the mantel, a quiet reminder of where this all began. It had once been a symbol of desperation. Now, it was a talisman of hope. That night, as he tucked the boys into bed and kissed their foreheads, Julian paused at the door. He looked back at them, safe and smiling, wrapped in the warmth of a world he once thought he'd lost. He turned to Anna, who stood in the hallway waiting for him. "We made it," he said. She reached for his hand. "No," she whispered. "We're just getting started." And somewhere deep inside Julian Carter's chest, something bloomed, a quiet, fierce joy that told him the past had not defined him. Love had, family had, and the future was theirs to write, together. Julian Carter's story began not with a grand gesture or a business breakthrough, but with a moment so small it could have passed unnoticed, a toy car held out by trembling hands in the middle of Central Park. That one exchange born from desperation and innocence would unravel the tightly wound life of a billionaire CEO and begin something none of them could have predicted, a journey toward healing, redemption, and love. Julian was a man who had spent years isolated by grief. After losing his wife and young son in a tragic accident, he buried himself in work, constructing a fortress of success around a hollow heart. He was respected, admired, and feared in equal measure. But none of it filled the void left by the family he had lost. He thought he had accepted his fate, survive, perform, endure. What he never expected was to care again, to feel again, and least of all, to love again. Eli and Noah Green, twin brothers with nothing but each other, were living on the edge of survival. Their mother Anna was critically ill, and they had no one left. In a desperate attempt to save her, they tried selling their only valuable possession, a red toy car, a gift from the father they had already lost. That act of courage, pure and unguarded, intersected with Julian's morning walk and changed everything. What followed was more than charity. It was the slow, unfolding miracle of connection. Julian didn't just pay for Anna's hospital stay, he opened his home. But more importantly, he opened his heart. Over time, strangers became guests, guests became companions, and companions became family. The cold halls of his penthouse, once echoing only with silence and memory, were filled with the sound of life again. Laughter, footsteps, late-night questions, and the ordinary chaos of togetherness. Anna, once too frail to walk, regained her strength and confidence. She found purpose not only in motherhood, but in advocacy, building a career that helped other single mothers find support. The boys, once wary and defensive, flourished under Julian's care, trusting again, laughing again, and finally calling him Dad. For Julian, the transformation wasn't about replacing what he had lost. It was about honoring it. He never forgot Thomas, his son, or Sarah, his wife. Instead, he created a life where their memory could coexist with new love, where grief made room for joy. He let his past inform him, but not imprison him. And in doing so, he discovered something incredible. The human heart can break and still grow stronger. From a lonely man in a towering apartment, to a father teaching his sons how to ride bikes and how to believe in second chances, Julian's journey reminds us that healing rarely comes in dramatic flashes. More often, it sneaks in quietly through trust-rebuilt smiles, shared rooms once closed, now filled with laughter. So, what can we learn from this story? First love isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like showing up, like carrying someone to the hospital without asking why, like making pancakes on a school morning or attending a soccer game even when you're used to boardrooms. Second, no one is beyond redemption. Julian Carter had all the trappings of success, but his soul was in exile. It took the innocence of two boys and the strength of a single mother to remind him that real wealth is measured in presence, not possessions. And finally, healing is not forgetting, it's transforming. You don't move on from grief, you carry it with you. But if you let it, that weight can turn into wings. If you're watching this and carrying your own losses, your own lonely routines, let this story remind you, life still has chapters to write. Sometimes they begin with the smallest gestures, a kindness extended, a door opened, a heart softened. If this story touched you in any way, if it reminded you of the beauty in unexpected connections, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us create more meaningful stories that inspire, heal, and remind us of the good still present in this world. And who knows, the next story might just be the one you need most. So click that subscribe button and join us on this journey of hope, one story at a time.